A circular saw is a super handy cutting tool for all kinds of DIY projects. Here are some tips that will help you use your circular saw confidently and get great cutting results. First, you want to support your work pieces well while you're cutting so that they don't move around and so that the pieces don't fall as you cut. This simple cutting grid does a really great job. It just spans between two work supports, the Kreg Mobile Project Center and track horse in this case, and holds pieces at a nice height, keeps them firmly in place, and even lets you clamp them in place if you want to while you're cutting. Plus, this cutting grid breaks down. It just pops apart easily so that you can store it compactly away when you're not using it. Next, you want to set up your saw, which usually just means setting the cutting depth. And the proper cutting depth is about 1/8 to 1/4 inch deeper than the thickness of your material. Of course, always make sure that the saw is unplugged anytime you're working on setups. Now, you can set the cutting depth using the scale on the saw, but that involves some guesswork, and here's an even easier way. Just keep a piece of 1/4 inch thick scrap around. This is something that I had left over from another project. Set the scrap on your workpiece, so now you have that thickness plus 1/4 inch. Just bring your saw in place, set it on the scrap, and drop the blade down until it bottoms out. Lock the setting in, and you know that you're set for the proper cutting depth. One of the big challenges with a circular saw can be aligning your blade with your cut line as you start the cut. You'll see a lot of people actually look down and try to watch the blade while they cut. But you don't have to do that thanks to a built-in feature that all circular saws have. This notch in the base plate shows exactly where the blade is located. So all you have to do is align the notch with your cut line and keep an eye on that as you start and make your cut to know you're cutting exactly where you want to. Once you have your saw set up and everything aligned with your cut line, you can make the cut. You want to make sure that you hold the saw with both handles so you keep good control, and make sure that the blade isn't in contact with the workpiece before you start the saw. Then just squeeze the trigger, let the blade get up to speed, and push the saw forward. Don't push too hard or too fast as you cut. You need to give the blade time to work. By following the notch in the saw base and using the work support to hold the piece, you can make that cut easily and make it straight. To make straight cuts even easier with a circular saw, you might want to look into a couple of saw guides. This one is the Kreg Square Cut, and like the name says, it's made for making straight square cuts across boards as you cut them to length. And it's really easy to use thanks to this arm. The arm gets set to the distance from the edge of your saw base to the blade. So all you have to do is align the end of the arm with where you want to cut, and you know that the saw will be positioned right where it needs to be. Just hold the square cut in place and make your cut. Now you can see that with a guide, you get a super straight cut really easily without having to guide the saw along your cut line. If you're cutting plywood and other sheets, then you'll want to look at a saw guide that will help you make long straight cuts with your circular saw. One option is this rip cut. It has a sled that you attach your saw to, and you can take your saw back off when you want to, and then a long arm that the sled rides on. A measuring scale on the arm lets you lock in the measurement you want. This edge guide follows the edge of the sheet as you cut to keep your saw running straight. So all you have to do is hold the edge guide against the edge of your sheet, guide the saw along, and you'll make a long straight cut. So you can see that this guide, the rip cut, gives you a nice long straight cut, and once again, the work support cutting grid keeps everything in place while you're working. Another option for getting straight circular saw cuts in plywood and sheets is the Accu-Cut. It's a long track that you just lay on your sheet and align with your cut lines. That way you know exactly where you're going to cut because the saw blade follows right along this edge. And that edge also helps hold things so that you don't get splintering. The Accu-Cut uses the same sled as the rip cut. It just drops into place on the sled. So all you have to do is guide it along to make your cut. So there you go. Another nice, long, straight, and accurate cut with a circular saw. So you can see that it's a tool that really can give great cutting results if you just follow these tips and consider using a couple of saw guides. And here's one more tip. If you haven't used a circular saw a lot, find some scrap material and practice making cuts before you cut into your project materials.